Today I want to talk about bards. More specifically, I want to talk to you about the reputation that bards have in the modern day culture of play as being the great seducers. When it comes to a big bad evil guide, when it comes to 3,872 orcs, when it comes to angels, demons, devils, and oozes, there's a meme-tastic stereotype going on that the bard is looking to seduce them as their strategy of first resort. I think this stereotype has its roots in some actual play that's occurring, and I want to unpack a little bit of that. We're going to have to set aside some of the prior reasons that bards have a tough reputation, and we will go through that. But before we do that, I thought it would be fun to acknowledge the real falling flat of the previous video on the channel. Yeah. If you're new here, you may have noticed that I tend to go into a great deal of depth about very specific topics in role-playing games. And this includes role-playing games that aren't D&D.
Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill.
And this means that sometimes I will put a lot of effort, and a longer video might happen, into topics which are not for everyone. But by all means, that doesn't mean that things won't come back around to your area of interest. And in the meantime, maybe we'll get to know each other and we'll develop a familiarity so that more of what I have to say might be more useful to you as my perspective starts to take root. Suffice it to say, let's get into it with bards and their sexy reputation. The bard as an entity in AD&D history begins its life as something like a prestige class. Somewhere in an ancient magazine, there was a very long list of requirements to become a bard. You had to be this kind of class and this kind of class and have an extremely high ability score. And at the end of the day, you got a really weird set of abilities. And so it often felt like someone was diverting their character from being particularly effective in the name of reaching this goal. And in later years, as the tough requirements started to reel back, the yields in terms of applicable or interesting character abilities that advanced at a similar rate to the rest of the party were either not forthcoming, or that bad reputation really was very difficult to overcome. By the days of 3.5, things diverted, and there was an interest in setting the bard on a newer tack. They were a musically inspired arcane caster. In the same way that sorcerers are different than wizards and clerics are different than oracles, there's another source, which was the music inside of you. The half-baked, kind of in-the-middle-of-the-road magic of the bard was sometimes difficult to find an interesting identity in those days. And then we come to 5e, where mechanically we see a character which is very much a jack of all trades. They've got really solid spell casting, they have some ability to go toe-to-toe, they have some ability to apply most of the skills in the game to their character, and yet they've got this reputation of sameness. They've got this one thing that they do.
Hey, how you doing?
And it's sort of a little absurd, but many things in D&D are, as far as how people approach certain situations, and sometimes people do things just to be funny within more casual tables, and that's okay. I think that there's room in the hobby for every different kind of play style, as long as you've got the right group. But nevertheless, why does this seem like the main thing within easy reach, even for these casual groups? Well, I would put it down, for my part, not to the bard themselves in these modern day times, but instead to the perception of what charisma is. Because the one thing that bards have, the one thing that all bards have if they choose to become a bard, is show up at the table with a high charisma score. And what does charisma mean? If we were to look in the rule book for what charisma is, we would see that it tells us that charisma measures your ability to interact effectively with others. Effectively. is a word that I would pick out there because it tells me that the character is seeking an effect in the world, and through that intent, sometimes a die roll is invoked and an ability check happens. So, what things can you do when you're seeking effects? If you want to grab something, it has to be somewhere within the radius of your arm. And I think one of the things that in looking at charisma and looking at what high charisma is, we've gauged ourselves somewhere in our culture of play, somewhere in the zeitgeist of Dungeons and Dragons, to believe that a high charisma score means an amazing reach. And I think in the case of the Bard's meme-tastic reputation as a seducer, it could be that we've reached a place where it's almost superhuman what people are expecting bards to be able to accomplish when they're allowed to roll a die, and that high charisma score is informing that die roll. After all, one of the questions to put this into context is, for a strength ability check, what can a character do in terms of lifting multiple tons or an entire sailing ship over their head? Is that something that you look at as a high strength score enabling? Is it possible for a high constitution score to let you eat plutonium? Or a high dexterity roll? Can that let you dodge bullets? I think there's answers to these questions in the air when you sit down to play Dungeons and Dragons. Or those questions will be answered very shortly as you play together about what is the superhuman limit for different ability scores. What's possible? What's in reach? And what can get within reach by applying a skill, applying an ability score, and having a die roll invoked. What I will also say, though, is that one of the things that's constantly moving these superhuman limits is the rule of cool. It's something which is nearly fundamental to most gameplay of Dungeons and Dragons nowadays. Say yes or roll the dice was the conventional wisdom a long time ago. It was an advice to say that your characters, your players are trying to participate in this world. The thing that they have control over in terms of the story is their character. In order to change anything, they have to try and do something with the one thing that they have control over. And so when they're telling you they're trying to do something, let them do it or ask them how well they tried using the dice. And we opened up the door to more and more possible actions being worthy of receiving a die roll. And we opened up the door to the idea that 20 would mean an automatic success. And this is nowhere written, even in this edition of Dungeons and Dragons, but more and more people believe it to be so. It's learned from various places within our socialization towards the game. And from that, we have started to get this perception of what charisma is. If it sounds like I've made a slippery slope argument about what the rule of cool has wrought upon the hobby, I have. However, I will say it's not too late. And in some respects, all these jokes that are on the Bard are very much, I think, our incredulity, our desire for verisimilitude, our mind's eye, rejecting some of these instances of one-trick ponies, of reaching for seducing a lich or a dragon, absent the context which would make it possible for a character, a 5 to 7 foot tall adventurer in the world, no offense to halflings. The truth of the matter is that we all possess a certain amount of wisdom about what people can do, and we can share that and we can keep in touch with it. We create genre at the table when we play together and with what we seek out as far as our characters trying to do things. Are we seeking to play a superhero game, or are we seeking to play something a little bit more grounded with heroic protagonists inhabiting a world of high fantasy? And another thing to keep in mind is that some tasks within the world take more than one try. They require progress. In order to open the door to a dragon being attracted to your character, you may need to be perceived as attractive to dragons somehow. You need to introduce the possibility that you're a hot item on the dragon singles market before the dragon is even going to think about it.
We are the slut dragons. We live in these slut caves where we
I think now would be a good time to point out that even if something is within the reach of the rule of cool, according to what your table has discerned it to be, that doesn't mean that it can't be a role at a disadvantage. Things that are right at the limit of a character's reach are the sorts of things where the confounding factors are going to be in play. And there's the possibility that even if they are on a good stroke of luck, it will take 2 lucky breaks to make some of these things happen. For that matter, I would also remind you that you should roleplay NPCs. Maybe they've been persuaded, they've been intimidated, they've been deceived by a high charisma score and an accompanying proficiency bonus. But how they act upon being deceived, what they do next, having been intimidated or persuaded, is another matter entirely. A dragon might think that you're cute for a human and put you in a museum. The goal with this video is to look at how when we see these jokes arise in the hobby, when we see something which is so commonplace and so rote and repetitive that it's starting to have a whole family of jokes made about it, that it could be an indicator that there's some sort of change in the culture of play, which is being reacted to. The humor is almost like our immune system telling us that something is out of balance here. I don't mean game balance. I mean the equilibrium that lets us have fun and take our hobby seriously when we want to and laugh at other times. By all means, keep on seducing as a bard, but also take a look at what the limits of a character's reach are if you think Dungeons and Dragons can be things besides a superhero game. Thank you. I'm the Complex Games Apologist. This video came to life because your humble game master, a friend of mine called Lee, has started his channel back up again, and he's reminded us all that bards are more than simply how you doing. They are, in fact, part of the bedrock of fantasy and really an iconic character type. And I'd recommend you go over and take a look at his video that inspired this one.